Righty, looks like we're getting started. Commit. Spotlight on me. Yay. Let's see what's going on here. I don't look at the computer very much today, so I probably think I can leave. Might zoom out a little bit. Yeah, you can still think. Move it over a little bit so you kind of see the computer too. So you guys keep up with that without me actually having to share the computer. In case you want. But if you guys want me to share the computer. Got about 4 minutes until class kicks up. Let's see. Today we're gonna be rounding out chapter was it 15, and then we'll go back and hit the one that's on Miranda stuff we skipped over because it seemed like it was kind of a little bit out of order. We move back and forth between those things. It's better to kind of keep those clean, the Fifth and Sixth Amendment issues plus the Fourth Amendment issues, because while there's commonality between them, they are distinct. Let's see. So we'll wrap this up. So we get through this chapter and how far we get to the next one. When we're done with the next one, we should have covered all the chapters in this section. So at that point in time, we'll be looking to review for exam that's 3. And so then we'll have the last bit that we're working through. And good golly, this semester has gone really fast. Faster than I expected. Can't believe it's November already. Let's see, things going on in the world. Of course, last class I mentioned, this class I mentioned on the other side. So we had the election stuff yesterday. Probably the biggest thing for me is the kind of reality of those types of things is sometimes questionable, I guess is a good way to look at it, because it's like, yeah, we have those things that take place, but the functional effect that it has on our lives in the immediate is always a bit removed because it's several levels out. So it's one of those things that is always interesting because they get really tied into it. It's sort of like sports. You know, if you have your favorite team for rally clubs. I never really got into sports, I guess. I was kind of a nerd, I guess. I don't know. I liked fighting. That's martial arts, but that's usually one-on-one. That's a different thing. And so you don't have that team element. About the closest you get to that kind of stuff are small unit tactics for policing and things like that. It's like you can get into that a little bit, but not the same thing as those team sports. That's something different entirely. Let's see, things don't roll. Outside of that, let's see, has there been anything that's been going on that I can think of? I don't know. You guys tell me, is there anything going on in the world, in your guys' world that's something like that? Something you guys might have caught in the news or something like that? Because I've not really been paying attention to it much. I didn't even really watch the election stuff last night. It was kind of funny. I went and took a nap. It's like I've had so much of that stuff for the last few months, years, really. It's like I'll be glad when that's no longer a talking point. But that hopefully will be. I don't know. It's already a few more years out. Let's see here. 2 more minutes. 1 more minute. 1 more minute. So we left off, we were into search warrants. We were talking about them in terms of kind of unique facets of different warrant types, the different search warrant types, the different elements required for a warrant, the implications for it if you are missing any of those pieces, what exactly happens, and some of those thresholds associated with warrants, for example, the timelines, when you can affect them, for what purposes, where we get into the some of those exceptional situations. And it is officially 1 o'clock. Excellent. So when it comes to things being seized, realize that you have a few elements that are taking place, or at play, I should say. Let this person in, I'll kind of start over again. Goodness, it's Wednesday. Midpoint. Yes. All right. So looks like we can hear now. Excellent. So we were talking last time about search warrants and some of those situations where we're talking about very specific types of searches, some of those lines that are drawn related to those, right? In terms of warrant requirements themselves. I guess I'm starting a little early, but we'll give them a couple minutes before I get too much into it too much. So I don't have to restart it. We'll give it 2 more minutes in case anything that pops in. Let's see. So we've been talking about big elements associated with search. So you have everything associated with the practices of the search, the thresholds that we're getting into. Also, remember to kind of dial it back out. And if you pull back out, like the big elements that we're dealing with here are movement, freedom of movement in terms of if you're dealing with someone who's being seized. You're dealing with privacy. Privacy is one of those big lines that can cross all of these things. And possessory interest. And that's where this slide, I think it's slide 7. Yeah, 7 for chapter 15. That's where we'll pick up here because it starts talking about the lawfulness of a seizure. It's like you have all those elements, but that possessory interest is one that also needs to be considered, right? And whenever you get into that, that's going to be the interference with that possessory interest is one that's going to be time bounded. It's not something that's like, yeah, I've taken this from you. It doesn't really matter how far I take it. If it goes off into the police impound lot and it's your vehicle and it sits there for the next few days, or if I take it into the station, I start going through it immediately. None of that really functionally matters from I should say it doesn't matter from a procedural, because it does. It's just from this perspective, it doesn't have much bearing. It's that time factors is the biggest element of that possessory interest, right? So once you've gotten past that threshold for privacy, and that's like the looking element. Well, once you've done that, it doesn't really matter because you've taken it into your possession, so long as it's reasonable within that kind of time frame, right? And so this next slide actually starts talking about that time frame, and where the technology starts to come in is also in that span again, because that span is something that's going to just literally balloon out and touch everything when you start getting into electronics, because it literally touches everything. Here's what I talk about that here in the United States versus Mitchell. Where is my mouse? Right here. Boom. And so that's going to be the slide we're going to see here, the United States versus Mitchell. Basically, what they say here is agents detained a lawfully seized computer for 3 weeks, 21 days, before obtaining a warrant for the computer to search the computer, right? And so there's a time element. So they held it for 21 days before getting the warrant to search the computer. So it's in their possession. So for some reason, they have it came into their possession and look into the details for that. So that's probably one of those things that they got it on probable cause, but you need that warrant because of the nature of the stuff that's in it, right? We'll talk about that time element for a little bit longer, though. That's one that's particular consequence. So when we were talking about warrants, as in like arrest warrants or even search warrants of like people or places, generally, if you have the time to go get it, you should. Right? The major thing with a warrant is it's time. It's time and its flow is basically what it is. When you go get a warrant, you had a judge make that determination the probable cause exists. That gets the weight off of the officers who have to do it, right? That's the general idea of why we do that, because we want those decisions to be properly vetted. What happens, though, is if it's in my possession, is there any change taking place, right? And so we'll deal with a more concrete example before going into the computer, trying to make it a little bit clearer. Like if, for example, let's say I pull over a vehicle, and in the course of that encounter, I've identified the fact that this person's a major drug dealer, right? Maybe I found like a huge amount of drugs in there. So we got all of the reason that we need. It naturally evolved from just like let's say some like a tag stop or something minor. Just unfolds from there. I arrest this person and I impound the vehicle, right? Now I found drugs in it, which means I tossed the vehicle to some degree. Is that the fine tooth comb that you can go through with a vehicle? Usually not. Usually those are kind of pretty quick, right? You won't have somebody completely disassemble the vehicle right there on the roadside, but can't happen. um, what happens that goes into the impound, right? All right. So as we're in that vehicle's in the impound lot, it's in the possession of the police department. So you've got that interference in there. You've got that um, what would be reasonable because that person's going to be, getting booked and going through all those processes while you have this vehicle. Maybe you're going to keep the vehicle for the period of time you found the drugs in it. Okay. Found the drugs on him and you impounded the vehicle for whatever reason. Let's just say it was left there and he got impounded later. Does that make any functional difference if you search the vehicle immediately on the scene or 3 days after the fact when it's sitting in the impound lot? Makes zero difference because whatever's in the vehicle has been in the vehicle to begin with, right? There's no change once it goes into police possession. It's going to be in that parking lot, that impound lot. It's the same way for people and their clothing or their possessions. Like, you have a wallet on you. We're going to take that wallet. We're going to inventory it. Right? We're going to take note of what's in it. That's part of those processes. But functionally, it's like those processes say that they need to take place immediately upon entry, or is it something that there's going to be a reasonable delay? And that's going to be part of the natural flow that there's some reasonable delay. And you can't necessarily put hard lines on those things. When we move to computers, same rule applies, right? A little bit different though, because you have that functionality aspect. The vehicle's like physically functional. Your wallet's not necessarily functional, right? It doesn't necessarily do anything, just hold stuff. Computer does a little bit of both. It'll hold things and it's function. So you have a little bit more that in terms of function and that infringement. But really what you're talking about here is the information on it, right? And so if you look at United States versus Mitchell, what they'll say here is they lawfully seized this computer for 3 weeks. They had it in their possession for almost a month before they finally decided to go get a search warrant for it. Now, that's a long time period, right? When you start dealing with these things, that time period matters, but they won't necessarily set a hard time frame. What will happen is you have a case like this where there is a time frame attached to it, but the particulars of the case are what dictate that time frame. And so you can start to set in guidelines from there. It's sort of like the knock and announce thing from a couple classes ago, right? We have an idea that 1, 2, boom, it's not it, right? We know that because that happened in a case that was challenged. We also know that the 7 or 8 seconds will suffice because we had another case that had done that. Or you can go into the what else was going to say there? Get that time element. So that's how it's established. Here, 21 days before obtaining the search warrant. That was determined to be an unreasonable infringement, right? Next case, just a couple years later, 25 days, longer time period, not an infringement. Okay, how is that the case? If you look at those bullets there, it will tell you a little bit about those details, right? To some degree, you might be able to say, that looks like good faith or something of that nature. Do it. That second bullet will tell you. Officers seeking the warrant began work on affidavits and documentation for the warrant immediately. It takes time. In this case, if they started immediately and it's 25 days to get, it's like, how complex could that have been? Right? It might have been that. Is that the reason for it? That seems reasonable to me. Yes? Further, why is it not an infringement? Realize if you're dealing with digital things, how easy is it to duplicate? Click a button, right? So that person had access to anything that was on that computer that they could have asked for or gotten off of it entirely. On the flip side, also keep that in mind. If it's digital, they have access to it, right? How easy is it to copy it? Same thing, right? So that's why one of the reasons why you guys are the most what's the phrase I want? Oversight, the levels of oversight that you guys scrutiny, those types of things. Hitherto impossible. Now it's a daily thing. Okay. So you see that the time frame itself is not necessarily strict, right? The factors involved dictate it, right? If there's something that makes this distinct, you can have an argument for a shorter time frame or a longer time frame in either direction. Okay, here's where they outline the different types of warrants. We've already talked about this, so I'm not going to go into high detail for that one. Basically, we deal with nighttime, no knock, anticipatory sound searches, sneak and peek, and then administrative. So here's what they'll talk about each of those. All right, nighttime. Usually those are pretty restricted searches. Going to be daytime, right? I think we talked about that in terms of like arrests too. It tends to be a thing where it's like most business is conducted during the day because you want it to be during the day. Start moving to the nighttime, you start catching people in off hours. There are reasons to do so, right? Maybe that's the hours of their activity, or maybe that's the hours you're going to catch them by surprise. And maybe you need to. Right? Here, Federal Rule Criminal Procedures 41E permits nighttime searches when it be shown to be reasonable. In a legal drug case, nighttime execution does not have to be specifically authorized in the search warrant. And so that's going to do with time frames. So basically what you need to get out there is I'd want to refresh my memory on blanket exceptions because I would want to double check to see if they have a blanket exception in place for drug cases, right? Because that's what that would be. If that facet of day or night does not apply to drug search warrants, what do you have there? That would be a blanket exception. What that means here, though, the way that's written, that's open for interpretation. You want to double check that. That's why I said that way. Because the very next slide, they start talking about the reasons for no knock, but they don't really get into the reasons for nighttime besides this. That's the same kind of thing, though. So the same reasons for a nighttime can be similar to, can overlap with a no knock warrant. Basically, what you get there is that element of surprise, that time of day, those factors are going to overlap. What are we talking about? Danger to those in, really. Destruction of evidence is a big. Let's see what's it say here. Escape or futility is what you start dealing with. And so you lose the suspect, you lose the evidence, it's a useless or a waste of time at the lowest end of the spectrum. And then at the other end, you have that danger, the danger. And that's one that goes a little bit goes both ways, right? Because we talked a little bit about that in class already. Okay. Here's where they talk about the time here. In one case, it was. Another case, you can find it isn't. And so that's going to vary on the particulars of that case. But in terms of hard timelines, it's like those are harder to establish. 1 to 2 seconds isn't. What is 7, 8, that kind of a thing. Yeah. After examining the amount of time the police waited after knocking to enter the apartment, court held forced entry was reasonable under circumstances known at the times of the officers. So what they're talking about in the United States versus Banks is making that distinction of when you have a required knock and you've made it, and you can make that, well, forced entry, right? Again, it's going to be on that reasonableness. Is it reasonable, right? To the officers, and it says here, that last part, known circumstances known at the time. That's a really, really, really important facet of it. Anytime you start dealing with force, that's probably one that you want to talk a little bit more about. That's the facet of unknowns. How many unknowns are in the situation and the dangers that those produce. Because that's going to be the big thing. Is there's always limited information, and those bits of information that you don't know might be the things that make this situation distinct from being your standard run-of-the-mill encounter to being this thing is going to use force and maybe deadly, right? And to do anything other than take it from the perspective of someone entering into it with the knowledge that they have is an unfair assessment, because you're coming in with more knowledge, more information, more time to, a multitude, probably a million times over, because that's usually split second decisions kind of thing. And you don't have any of the stress associated with being actively in it or facing that thing. So yeah, it's a real hard thing to make those determinations. You really have to look at it from a well-balanced perspective. And that's not easy to do. It takes a lot of people to do that. Okay. Anticipatory warrants, I talked a little bit about those. Largely, again, you're talking about drugs, right? These drugs are going to be in this place at this time, right? So here's what it says here. That allows police to get warrants for directed at a person and place where it's reliably anticipated illegal contraband or other evidence of crime will be located at some specific place in the future. Now, each of those are parts of that, right? So it's like where it's directed, it has to be reliably anticipated that you're going to have something here that is criminal, that crosses that threshold, right? That reliability there and specificity, right? Between those, the specificity, you can corroborate it to get reliability. That's a big thing. I think here in a minute talks a little about informant tips. I'm not going to talk too much about that because that's more of a different course. That's kind of procedures in this one. Next, probable cause must exist. Evidence will be found when the search is conducted. Otherwise, it's a violation. Yeah. Essentially, what they said in Grubbs, United States versus Grubbs related to anticipatory warrants. Technically, all of them are anticipatory, right? Anytime you're doing it, you're authorizing a future action there. So the purview for anticipatory warrants isn't really all that distinct if you think about it, right? Whenever you go to conduct a search, you're conducting it with that anticipation that you're going to find something or someone to arrest, right? Something to seize, someone to arrest. There you go. Here's where they talk about sneak and peek. Reasons why you would do that. To secure evidence. I like it and I don't. It's one of those things it has very good value, but the dangers associated with this are non-zero, right? Because you have people who entering premises you would otherwise have no access to, should require some type of validation to have, right? We're talking that warrant. But here's some of the reasons why they do it. Photograph contents of methamphetamine labs or to plant devices in for lists. So there's reasons why you would do that. Do that kind of thing. Some questions that arise in practices, policies, procedures, and that kind of stuff, though. And anytime you have something that's happening without oversight, realize that that's the whole problem with this system. This whole thing that we've been doing the whole way through is setting standards and thresholds for things. Started with probable cause in the 1700s, right? Originally just cause. Now we have to have some level there. Now, yeah, people do it to justify it later, I guess. I don't know. When it talks about administrative searches, basically what they're talking about here is health, wellness, those types of things, right? Health, fire, building, food inspectors. Those are different types of search warrants, right? Lower standard applies here because of the fact you're dealing with public stuff, public services, those types of things. This is where I mentioned that you can find this in the news related to the Oklahoma County Jail, right? Oklahoma City. If you look, I think I did this in, it might have been in the specified not, but if I didn't do it in the specified, you should do it on your own. Just go ahead and look up the county jail and health inspectors, because they've had more than one instance where they're turned away. And if you stop and think about that, the number of people who died in that jail in the last couple of years, it's like, ooh, what's going on there? Got a lot of people, a lot of troubles there. Hard to manage all that. So it's what could be this whole range of things, right? So you can see the value of those administrative searches, no matter where they're going, whether it's restaurant or county jail or any other thing. Okay. So here's where they jump back into computers again. Computers, again, you have that possessory interest, you have the things that they do, information. You know. The biggest thing for computers, though, will be the privacy aspect of it because it branches out so far. In terms of what you get access to, what you see, how it's used, and those types of things, right? I'll give you a conspiratorial element first, so we have something to play with. If it's never used against you, it was never used in the first place, which means if it's never used in any official documentation, it never existed, even though it might guide all, I could say it might guide any investigative aspects of it informally, right? You stop and think about that, what I just said. I'm aware of this information. I'm not actively using it. It is in my mind, and it might guide what I'm actually thinking of, but I won't acknowledge that because I've got other ways to acknowledge all the information I've been able to grab. That's an independent source, right? So there are some serious dangers here. Some measure of good faith that is immeasurable, I guess, is another way to look at it. Ooh, I just noted I had a comment on here. I have trouble seeing those. I mentioned that in one of my classes earlier. So if there's ever a comment that pops up, let me know because I don't know. That was from the beginning class. You'll let me know about stuff going on. That's cool. Thank you. I missed that though. That's one of the things that's not a huge issue, but I have trouble seeing because it's about, what did I say, 20 to 30 feet from me to the TV screen in the back of the room. And that font is probably all of that big, so I can't really read it. The grades, I can read it, but it takes me a little bit to focus on it. I won't catch that it's got a little red button that's all of maybe, a centimeter tall. So, you see something on there you want to sound off, go ahead and click on the button, sound off if you have your response. So here, that expectation of privacy and all the stuff that you have on your computer, right? Your personal computer is one thing. It's your work computer. How much overlap is there, right? Example. No, I'll wait till we give you this example at the end because I'll tell you a story that you'll like. Okay.
Tell me what you've been up to the last year.
Me? Oh man, so much stuff.
Okay, care to elaborate on the stuff?
As of late, I've been trying out for Jeopardy.
I'm going to mute that because I don't know if that's in relation to. But I will tell you a story about cell phones and searches and things of that nature related to business cell phones and some of those practices because it's one of those things that's really, really, really interesting to see. Because it's pretty easy to identify what happens there. All right, computer searches, plain view. Okay, so I've got access to your computer, but then we also have that aspect of plain view. What all is plainly viewable within a computer? It'd be like saying, I can look in your window of your house, but how long can I stand in the window? How many windows can I look in? Right? That privacy can go away pretty quickly. Plus, what kinds of things can give probable cause for other searches? So just because of the nature that something is more than likely could identify something criminal, I'm already looking. So how many other ways, how many other areas do I get to look into now? Do I get to look into every aspect of every part of your life? Right? Here it mentions narrowly tailored only to look for things described in the warrant. That's hard to do, right? Let's say it's has to do with graphic images, right? You're dealing with that kind of stuff. As you're dealing with that kind of stuff, okay, you're looking for pictures. So every picture on the computer, how is that going to be set up? How did that person save it? What areas of the computer are those things going to be in? Did they have two different user accounts? So it's only in one user account? Did they have two hard drives plugged in? Do you need access to both hard drives? Do they have it spread across all of their files so you need to look at everything? Or is it something they've got it partitioned off in one place, right? And then as you're dealing with that, and then, oh, here's a realistic one. I had someone I knew who used to do this. They do forensics on computer hard drives. Basically pulling out the hard drive, you stick it into another computer that's got the program in it to read the deleted files and reintegrates them for what's there. Okay, pulls all that stuff up, finds a whole bunch of child pornography. Great, you got the guy, right? When he goes to I don't think it came up at trial. I think it was before trial, but it might have come up at trial. Guy also had pictures of his family, right? You got pictures over here, pictures over here. Some of those included his kids in various states of dress, but not pornographic. But they're in bad. That itself can meet those qualifications because you're already engaged in this too. And now that we're looking, is that something they get additional charges for or not? Should we even be looking at those in the first place? Is that a place that we should be looking for that? Yes, no, and how do you draw those lines? They're going to someone else. Why wouldn't you look over here? Should you look over here? But that's their family life. That's their home life. That's their privacy life. That's a different file. That's not an easy argument. That's not easy to do. Let's see. Here's what did they say? Recommended like a third party, something like that. Because that's basically what you end up doing. Guidelines for issuing warrants: segregation or redaction of all seized files and turn over only what is requested in that warrant. Realize to do that, you need a third party, right? Because if I have it, I'm giving it to you, but you can only have the parts of it that you need to see that I don't want you to have. So that third person's going to have to look in the middle, right? That would be like asking. Well, I'll go through that and I'll hit those points in a second. Government search protocol must be stated in the warrant, so how they're going to do it. Warrants and subpoenas must disclose any risk that information may be destroyed during the search, right? Because as you're accessing it, things can be altered, destroyed, blocked, moved, and become otherwise inaccessible. Right? Government must destroy, return the owner, if legal, any non-responsive information discovered in those computer files. So they have to give them a copy of everything they found. Now, realize all the steps involved. You're going to have multiple people, including an independent party, because if you don't have an independent party to address that middle step right there, what are you going to get? You're going to get something that's biased one way or another, right? And anytime we do things blind, if you look at it, it's like, ooh, people don't do well at that. I think in here I've mentioned FISA courts. FISA courts are the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act courts, the ones that deal with basically spies, right? Now, if we look at those warrants issued from those courts, the ones where they've had special masters who go in and review them, how many of those found that there was no probable cause? That number is not 0. That's a problem, right? Okay. So the interesting thing about computer files and those types of things, one of those, with that first one, what I want to talk about, counts. Just think about this in terms of counts, right? It says threats, seductions, pornography, most frequent internet, followed by identity theft, computer hacking. We're just doing the pornography element of it, right? You have people who are passing that kind of stuff along. realize that, one, as people download stuff, you download it, it goes to your downloads. When you go to save it, it saves it in another place. Good luck. You just doubled the number of charges you have. Right? That's exactly how those things work. So it's one that multiplies really quickly. So it's something that's, in some ways, that's both really, really bad and really, really good. Because that what happens is people engage in this. You have a lot of accounts you can hit them with. So that way you can put them away, ideally. But it's more, if I have someone holding a picture of it, and I take a picture of that, a picture of a person holding a picture, or just a picture of that picture, what do I have? Second count again, right? And so think of how easy it is to duplicate files or alter files. To what degree is it that it's in your possession? If you change something with it, is it now a different file, right? And that runs across all types of things, not video, illicit stuff, illicit pictures, that kind of thing. Good example of that, we see it on the other side. This would have been that Kyle Rittenhouse trial. If you go back and you have watched that, or if you remember it, you may remember that there was some outcry related to drone footage, right? So you get that cyber footage kind of thing, right? Basically, the crux of the dilemma was what was disclosed through Brady. You guys remember the Brady rule? You have to disclose exculpatory evidence. Well, what the prosecution had given to the Rittenhouse, would you say party? I don't know. I have to look back at that. The defense. Was it a different resolution than the images that they had? They were blurry. They were blurred to the point where they're almost unrecognizable for what was actually going on. And then when you get to trial, bam! Oh, look, here's the high resolution ones. These are HD TV. Huh. That other thing you were looking at is like if you were looking at an old analog about this big. You can't see anything. You can't form an argument for that, what you're seeing here. Now we've got the real thing. We're going to show you. Now we're going to play an argument here. We're going to make some stuff up. Kind of some interpretations there, right? That's what I just said, because that's interpret was whether or not something was made up. What is interesting though is to see those two different files have two different levels of resolution, and those prosecutors had video editing software literally sitting on the desktop. That doesn't drive with me very well. I don't know. I think the average person kind of look at that and have some questions too. But yeah, so that's what you start dealing with. Even touching the stuff can cause it to be something that's different. And guess what? Not only are you engaging in something that you should not be doing, it's getting worse every time you do it. Right? The electronic stuff's pretty interesting. Most websites are overseas and outside of jurisdictions. That's the other thing with the cyber stuff. Where is your jurisdiction and how many people are implicated? Like I said with the FISA courts, that's just foreign intelligence in general. Anytime you have data that jumps the border, leaves this country, you've communicated outside of this country. That's well within the purview of foreign intelligence, because that's knowledge going forward. That's what it is by definition. And so now you fall into that for those conversations that anybody who wants to hear them, there is no privacy associated or whatever it was you were sending. Whether it was, you fall into the purview of that just by having your data bounced out, right? I think I gave an example where you used a VPN and set your assigned location to a different country. Yeah, that's a great way to get a new set of movies to watch. Also, open door, right? Let's see. We start dealing with that jurisdiction. You have to deal with what is this? Is it where it originates from? Is this where the recipient is, or the target is? Is this the place with housing the actual, like in terms of like child pornography stuff? I think last time I mentioned an actual dark web business that had been running on that. And if that was this class, if it wasn't, let me know. I'll give you more details about that. But that's how it worked. You end up having to coordinate across many different jurisdictions to include countries. Like, so you're talking about across all levels. And so it gets really complex.
Here's where they start talking about different things that hold information. They have access to search warrants based on probable cause, consent. Okay.
Right here in this slide, where it's talking about, where it talks about, law enforcement can obtain access to a search warrant based on probable cause with consent. Officers must hold the devices until a search warrant is obtained to open them. Right? And so it has to do with some of those limitations. So that way you can, that's sort of like the parallel for the guy who, husband and wife outside of the residence, wife informs them that there are drugs inside the house. Okay, we're gonna keep the husband out here while you get the warrant, right? To keep that from getting destroyed. Right? It says not every use police put to a lawfully seized cell phone constitutes a search. Right? So if they're not using it for search purposes, then that doesn't apply. What would be a non-search purpose? I want to say in this thing they talk about confrontational phone calls, right? You get somebody's phone call, you give somebody else a phone call. They think they're going to get a phone call from somebody, but they're actually getting a phone call from you. Yeah. And so that's not a search. What is that? To your vehicle, it'd be like taking it for a joyride. Is there any limitations on that for police officers and legitimate purposes? Not really. I mean, they can come to your vehicle, right? They need to. Okay. Officers must hold devices. Yeah. Okay. So here's where they start talking about Olmsted and cats. I think I've already talked about this, so I won't spend too much time on it. Just only about 13 minutes. So Olmsted's the one that originally dealt with wiretapping. Katz is the one that overruled it. Said here, prior to 1968, no laws related to wiretapping or electronic surveillance. That's because they were dealing with the physical intrusion into protected places or protected things. This is not physical at all. And so you can see, originally it started out with analog signals. Now we've moved into the digital sphere, which is far more complex. Okay. Here it talks about wiretapping, electronic surveillance orders, and those types of things. Not the exact same process as the warrant, but same processes basically. Okay. Wiretapping or surveillance done in violation of this, following these processes, is a felony. Distribution, possession, advertising for wiretapping stuff is also made a felony. That's interesting, right? Just selling stuff. Is it though? I think that's actually pretty easy to do. Okay. So if you start dealing with information, evidence that's been seized through wiretaps and electronic surveillance, those types of things, we're going to start to deal with it. Of course, if it's seized illegally, unlawfully, you can't use it. If its approval was insufficient or it was not in conformity with the all of the processes there, right? So you have the processes in getting the order. You have the processes that you'll specify for placing like a tracking device or instituting surveillance. You also have to have the return, right? So you got a tracking device affixed to something, how you're going to get it back, so it's not just gone. You also have, that's basically start talking. It's like how you reclaim it, how you get that information back, or that property back, that physical item. Right. Insufficient on its face is troublesome language, right? That's like the same problem I gave you whenever we were talking about art versus pornography. Like, I know it when I look at it. That's one way to do it, but good God, it's not hard to get a consensus on that one. Here, some courts have held technical violations do not require suppression of evidence required under that order. So that would be those minor deviations from whether it's procedures listed in its return or in placement or something of that nature. Typically, where you start running into issues is where if you're If you're surveilling something, where you move into protected environments, that's usually where it's like that's the tracking side of things.
Okay. Commonwealth versus Spence, it talks about, this is using confidential informants. Yeah. So this is one where,
Trying to draw that line on, I guess, wiretapping versus listening in, right? Is that a wiretap? If someone just calls and makes a phone call and you listen in. That's a good question, right? Because you are moving into that territory where is this a consensual conversation? Right? Becomes a little bit more difficult to identify that. Right? If you're dealing with recording policies in states, I think last time we talked about one party versus two, right? If it's two-party consent, you need both parties to consent before recording the phone call. I'm trying to remember where that would come up before. I don't know. But if I'm wiretapping, I have to go through these processes. Guy just consensually picks up his phone. Well, I'll just call him this. I'm going to call him. All right. Here he is. I'm going to put it on speaker. Okay. So what's going on now? What's the difference between that and having an officer sitting in your closet? Right? That's not the same thing as wiretapping. Right? Here, the instructions do not violate the statute. Holding the informant's cell phone is not a device. That's how they do it. Right? Because usually what they're tying is actual devices that you install, whether it's the wiretapping and picking up all conversations and recording those types of things. That's not what this was. This was something different. And so you can see those lines get blurred a little bit. Thermal imaging, we'd already talked about. This is where they're trying to identify the temperature inside of the house. That's the functional equivalent of physically going inside the house, right? You're trying to determine something that's inside of the house using technology. That's a no. Sorry, can't do it. That'd be like getting your good sound device and walking up to somebody's window and just pointing it in the window. Yeah, that ain't gonna fly like that. Yeah. To what extent can you use it? Here's where it comes back in again. You can use it so long as you don't. How's that for a contradiction? Let's say they have done this, right? Now they have confirmed that house is 10 degrees hotter. That is definitely a growing operation, right? Whether it's cocaine or marijuana or whatever, opium, whatever, it doesn't matter. That room's warmer. We know that. Okay. Well, whenever I go for the warrant, I'm not going to even mention that I did that. I won't mention that one thing. Right? Now, since it's not being used against you, it's not there. Right? And so you have that aspect of it. But where's the line where you can officially use it? Is there a line? Yet to be determined. Okay. Sense enhancing devices give information regarding the interior of a home that could not be obtained otherwise. Being there physically is the functional equivalent of being there physically. You might as well just kicked in the door for no reason. Okay. Tracking devices, this is what we're talking about that. I'm going to get into that. United States versus Knox. This person had moved into home residence, right? It gives it pretty clearly. It's like, okay, so they track the device. Normally what it is it's the equivalent to just being in a public place and seeing the vehicle. You can see the vehicle from a public place. There's no differentiation between I have a tracking device on it and I'm standing out at the sidewalk just going, hi, howdy, neighbor. See your vehicle over there. No difference. Except whenever it moves into one of those protected areas, like
Hey, now it's now parked up next to the house. It's up in the garage. It's something like that. You've moved into that protected area. And it wasn't really your choice how it moved. Your choice was you stuck it to something that could move there, right? And the fact that it did means now you got some problems. Yeah, there you go. Right. So make sure you get that warrant first. Okay. Here's where they talk about that physical intrusion theory. That's what they're talking about. That historically it was bound to that physical aspect of it. If there's no physical violation of whatever, nothing happened. Even the analog, before you get to the digital, there's nothing necessarily physical associated with it. I don't have to physically do a whole lot or anything at all related to what your bank account to take all the money from it. I just need to press a few buttons, right? And so recognize that, and that's what they've started to do over the last decade or last 100 years, because that picks up in 20s, right? GPS attachment to the car can be because, hey, physical intrusion, that expectation of privacy, but only if it moves into these certain areas, right? Or if you're doing something that's tantamount to that, something equivalent. Here's where they go into some more of the other types of electronic things: pen registers, trap and trace devices, outgoing, incoming calls, message. And then just message content. That'd be if you're actually recording calls. The metadata on that is one of those things that comes up every now and then. That would be who you call, how long you're on the phone with them, time frames for phone calls, and their frequency. From all that, I can map out everybody you talk to and you're close, how closely associated with them pretty quickly. Right. All right. Now here's where they move into the Patriot Act. There are a few points that I like to talk about related to the Patriot Act in terms of positives, benefits, like positives, negatives, benefits, drawbacks, that kind of a thing. But here, probably the surveillance side of things is what's most scary. We'll take the next 2 minutes. I'll tell you a little bit about that and I'll send you off. Then we'll jump back into this one next class and finish out next chapter. Probably next one. You have heard the name Edward Snowden. Almost certain that every single person who's in this class has heard that name. If you haven't, what you need to look up is the name Stellar Wind. That's the name of the program that he identified as taking place. Realize that that's the bulk collection of people's data related to communications and other things, right? And so that thing I told you, where I can identify everyone's friends, how closely they are in terms of their social networks. This under I get the quality of the nature. And if I really get into it, I can tell you whether it's a positive or negative phone call, right? If I really get into it. Okay, now think that you have access to every single phone call that's ever existed in this country for a certain period of time. Now think of what you can do. Ooh, that's a lot of power, right? That was something that whenever it was argued, even the argument for that one was pretty nasty. And I like to identify the people so they can see the nature of it. Why? The nature of it was that your individual rights were not violated because in bulk, the entirety of the country's rights were violated in that same fashion. So because it applied to everyone equally, it applied to no one at all in a negative way. Yeah, that didn't fly. Of course, didn't hold that one up. But that was the argument made. So don't be surprised if that argument comes up again in the future, because it will. It always does. Those things always do. All right. So we'll pick up with Patriot Act stuff. Next class, we'll talk a little bit about intercepting conversations, plain hearing, and that kind of stuff. Next class. Hope you guys had a fun class. It's always nice to come here and talk to you. Hope you have a great day and a great weekend. I know I've still been slow in getting back to you guys on stuff. That will should be straightened up over the next few days. I've been slowly cutting away at backlog work, and I think I'm starting to get caught up. But I don't know. I mean, there's always the holiday season coming around and all of the workload that comes with that. So if you need me, reach out. If it takes more than 2 emails ever or 2 days, feel free to hit me on my cell. It's the self text me so because I tend to be preoccupied. So that self text message will sit there a little longer. So if you need me, text me and I'll get back in touch with you, but it'll still probably take me a day sometimes. Sorry about that. I'm trying to work on that, get that squared away, but I know I've been very difficult getting hold of if you need me. Keep it up though. Move to the cell phone if you need to. Otherwise, I'll be here. Usually without exception, except we had a few exceptions this year. Good grief. Anyhow, you all take care and have a great day. I will see you all for evidence on Monday. You need anything, just let me know. Otherwise, have a good one. Bye.